Welcome to Data Science Perspectives. This series focuses on analytics and data science professionals from across industry to learn about how their career unfolded, what skills they look for when hiring, and what trends they think are coming next. I'm your host, Bill Franks. Let's get to it. Welcome to this episode of Data Science Perspectives. I'm your host, Bill Franks. Today I'm lucky enough to be joined by Wes Chaar. I first met Wes a number of years ago when he was an SVT at Turner Broadcasting here in Atlanta, back before the AT&T acquisition. When Wes was at Turner, he drove development of innovative solutions for audience targeting and advertising inventory management. He's currently the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Philo, which is targeting regulatory compliant cloud offers. In between Turner and Philo, Wes was the Chief Data and Analytics Officer for Catalina USA, which is a pioneer that's well known in the analytics space for consumer goods and retail. Wes helped Catalina bring new data and methods to the long-standing analytical offerings, and he's bringing that to Philo. Early in his career, Wes spent a lot of time working in revenue management, both for Delta Airlines and Sabre. For those who might not be familiar with Sabre, they're one of the organizations that really led the way in defining how revenue management still works today. I've always known Wes to dream big and push the limits. The various awards he and his team have won over the years show that he can get success. He has a PhD in aerospace engineering from the University of Texas. And with that, let's welcome Wes to the show. Hey, Wes, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Bill. Good to see you.
So one thing I always like to start with is that people in data science have such varied backgrounds. And I know you initially had a PhD in aerospace engineering. So what originally brought you over to our world of analytics and data science?
Well, I always followed the airline industry. I was always interested in the airline industry, and I realized way back when in the 90s that they were actually early pioneer in using data to really run the airlines. So the whole fields of revenue management, when you sell a seat, at what time, to which consumer, how you actually design flight scheduling, crew scheduling, and other things that the airlines do is actually driven mathematically with, operations research and algorithm fundamentally. So being in aerospace, actually, I was more, if you want to call it, a guidance, navigation, and control guy. I wasn't doing fluid mechanics or something. And that particular area of aerospace engineering is actually stochastic systems, estimation theory, control theory, a lot of the mathematics that I thought, wow, could be used maybe to do revenue management. And I pitched this idea to Sabre at the time, which was part of American Airlines. And when they were starting a research division, they liked the idea. And within a couple of days, I was basically offered a job at Sabre and to move to the airline space and do something different. It was really exciting. And I never looked back. I enjoy my aerospace days, but never looked back. I've been now in data science for 24 years? More than 20 years, certainly.
Well, it's interesting. You hit on something else I wanted to get into, which is, your early career was spent really deep in the airline space, Delta Airlines, Sabre. And back in the days that you were starting in that work, the analytics weren't as well developed. Obviously, the processing power and data available was less. So what were some of the initial challenges and successes that you had in the early days of revenue management?
Well, I started in the late 90s. So there were typically the revenue management solution in some sense that have been, if you want to call them, out there for a while. There was, this one idea at the time, how we can improve forecasting by maybe creating a multiple model framework rather than a single model of forecasting, have a number of models that can maybe work together to understand this model is better at forecasting maybe business behavior or business demand versus leisure demand. But what happened in the late 90s, obviously with internet, it really took us all the airlines into a new space. So one area that really came at the time was, wow, not do I only have my data now, but the data of other airlines, correct? Because you can go and look at what other airlines are offering online. That changed the whole thing. So it moved revenue management from the traditional, I'm living within my own data, I don't see anything else. The internet in the late 90s allowed everyone to see everyone, correct? Because the people are making their products available online for the consumer directly. So that created something at the time called Comp RM, and Comp stand for competitive. Competitive revenue management was the idea go scrape the data that you can scrape, correct, from the internet every night, correct, process it, understand, estimate what you think, is happening, at your competitors, whatever, and make those decisions. So it was the first time where revenue management was not simply with your own data, with your own silos, but now, you're getting signals from outside, from the marketplace, to really make smarter decisions.
Wow. And I guess one thing that would be interesting, because a lot of people might not know this, which is, as you mentioned, Sabre started out as part of American Airlines, and then they spun it
Yes.
out, right? And Sabre ended
Yeah.
up then basically servicing and being an innovator for all of the airlines, right?
All the airline industry. Not only did they just do that, so when it started with American, to your point, but there was such demand actually in the marketplace for airlines, not only in the United States, but all around the world. So actually, Sabre is the name for the global distribution system, but actually it has an airline solution business, which at least at the time when I was there, served airlines all around the world. But the other thing that they have also their travel network, but they also launched Travelocity. Travelocity was one of the earlier companies in the late 90s, mid 90s, late 90s, that was selling airline tickets and hotel bookings and various other things and bundling when Amazon was selling books. So they were pioneer even in moving, in some sense, the agency world from the way you would think about it before internet to what's called the OTA, the online travel agency. So they were pioneer of that. On top of that, they had made an acquisition at some point and even got in the hospitality industry with Synexis. So Sabre is a variety of things, travel and transportation, really at scale.
So what I find interesting then, you went from years in that industry focusing on the revenue management problems, and then you popped over to Turner here in Atlanta, which is where I had originally met you. And on the
Yeah.
surface, right, people would think, well, what is it? What is a Turner Broadcasting Systems and the media world have anything to do with revenue management? But my guess is you can explain that they're not as distinct from each other as people might at first think.
Well, I mean, there is a lot of yield and smart decisions that need to be made in getting that maximum yield correct from advertising. If you think of airtime, correct, on networks, correct, that's in some sense, how you schedule the ads. Do you give this campaign a particular spot at 8 o'clock, or do you give another campaign that particular spot? And imagine, in some sense, thousands of campaigns. Typically, there are thousands of campaigns running every day, and you have thousands of decisions that you have to make correct every day on how you schedule those ads and why this one needs to go here and this one needs to go there. The reason is, let me explain, because every campaign has a guarantee, correct? And a guarantee, let's just say perhaps viewership, how many people are going to see this campaign, as an example. Well, if you don't meet your guarantees, you're going to owe more airtime, correct, to satisfy your commitments, what you signed with that campaign. That is why optimization and yield management and revenue management comes into play in that setup. And that was initially one of the earlier projects we did, which we called ad scheduling. But besides that, there are other things obviously that the media companies would benefit from stochastic system, estimation theory, all the analytics tool that you can think of. But that was the first one. It was, hey, come on in, Wes, work with you, build a team, and start working resolving basically the ad scheduling problem, which has a lot of flavor and similarities with revenue management, actually.
And then from there, you ended up at Catalina USA, which, again, people of our generation remember they were really a pioneer in the retail and CPG space. Back in the old days, a lot of couponing focus and so forth, obviously moved more digital based in recent years. But what were some of the things that and innovations that you saw happening in that space in your time at Catalina?
Yeah, so certainly. So the company is well known, to your point, if you want to call it, they are at the bottom of the funnel. Historically, at least they were, correct? So the idea, you're at your store, at the retail store, you're checking out, and then you have that paper coupon that prints out, correct? Because they can identify you through frequent shopper card and make that promotion, that offer for you, correct? At the checkout lane. Well, with if you want to call it, the explosion of channels, correct, on how people can buy, correct, and where people perhaps can be reached. It's not anymore in store. It was in the past, maybe it was in store and a paper. We're talking, there is a lot of mediums by which you can reach consumer. So we're talking digital, mobile, addressable TV, social, radio, satellite radio. How could you reach consumers, from a company that just did if you want to call it paper couponing. So the way, companies do that all around, the country is basically they build an ID graph. So the ID graph is in some sense the crosswalk from a frequent shopper card to all these channels, correct? It connects the consumer to all these channels. And then, that was one of the things that had to be built at Catalina at the time, but also that allows, a variety now of things to happen. So let me explain. Number one, now you are connected at any point of that funnel, correct? You're not anymore at the if you want to call it, at the checkout lane. But then the other thing that happens, if you have your data set, you can enrich your data, correct? Enriching your data set allows you to do other services for other companies. So you can see in the news, if you Google and see, who's partnering with Catalina, what you find out is that, now they become a player in the TV ecosystem. They can be also player in the, data as a service vertical. And now they are, a player in the audience data and measurement business, correct? So the whole thing was driven really by that connection of that data that they had to other dimensions, to other channels, if you want to call it, and taking the data set that you have and enrich it. Any data set, Bill, I think you would agree with that, has only so much value. I mean, I love it when people say, oh, we can throw machine learning and whatever over the same data set and get more. You can get more, not necessarily significant. You may get a small increment at some point. But to take a data set and really provide it in new dimension, in new value, you have to fuse it, you have to integrate it, you have to enrich it with something else that will provide suddenly new insight that you didn't have. So the key thing that happened basically is building the ID graph, connecting to new channels, and really enriching the data set. And that drives obviously business, data as a service, an audience business, a measurement business, an attribution business, and a player in the TV ecosystem. So that's basically what happened during my tenure over there for 3.5 years almost.
It's funny, your mention of data. I remember I wrote a blog a couple of years ago, and the general premise was if I'm looking at a given model and you give me two choices, I can use the latest, greatest modeling methodology that just came out on the same data, or I can use a so-so methodology but incorporate some brand new data that actually has some distinct information in it. I'll take the new data every single time because the data itself, that extra information will overpower
Correct.
whatever minor lift you might get from a slightly improved modeling methodology.
Exactly.
So you more recently went to a startup called Philo, and I don't know that many listeners would know much about what they do. So what are you up to there, and how are you applying all of this background in that new environment?
So I'm helping Philo build a data team, a data and analytics team. They are a startup that is focused on the highly regulated industries such as CBD and cannabis, which is really, how do you say, is observing an incredible growth. The industry today is $10 billion. I was actually surprised that it is today a $10 billion industry in 2021, which is expected by end of 2025 to be close to $60 billion. I mean, this is how explosive, is the growth of that business and these products. So if you think of it in some sense, they have, interesting capabilities. Number one, they are a compliance company. So they have a compliance cloud because it's a highly regulated industry. So they are, the only one out there with the capability of providing services regarding regulations, correct, and laws that changes, correct, not only by state, but by county, by city, even by my neighborhood even. So that's one thing. So there is the regulation business, but then the other business is obviously the data business, correct? The promotion, the loyalty program, etc. That is no different in some sense, or similar, if you want to call it, to some of the other things that I've done in the loyalty space.
So as you look across your career, and obviously you've done a lot of roles and a lot of interesting problems, is there a specific trait, like what's one trait you think that you have that's really helped you be successful in navigating this career that you've had?
I mean, I am really an 80-20 kind of guy. I love my data scientist, but I'm not a 95-5 type person. I think, especially in the fields that we're working at, it's not like I'm working in the medical field where you need, if you're working in fields and, you get 80% of the value and you can implement that rather than getting 95% of the value, things change so fast, Bill, that, I prefer to take 80% of the value and develop something in 6 months rather than waiting a year and a half to get 95%. Because in 6 months, you have a new problem. Things change so dynamically. So one of the traits I would say People have always said, you're the sales guy who can sell mathematics. You're the sales guy that can, how we say, talk about data, talk about analytics without really uh, perhaps overwhelming sometimes maybe the business people, correct, with the details of the algorithm. Really sit down with the business folks and explain the value proposition, why we're doing that. I would say someone who has that can really help these projects, not really from inception, but really totally to implementation. Correct? It's really beyond the POC. How do you take the thing beyond the POC, beyond putting an API? How could you take it to the business, and how do you say make them, your supporter, your cheerleaders in the implementation, and your partners over many many projects? I think this is really I would say my strongest trait.
And is there something that you could mention if before you started working, right? We all learn things the hard way as we get into a real job. Is there one thing that you wish somebody had told you before you started working so you didn't have to learn it the hard way?
Yeah. Uh, who you work with is almost more important than what you do, to be honest. So what I mean by the culture and the company that you work with and the company's culture is really key. Who you work with, what type of people are you working with, correct? What is the culture of the company? That's really most important. I will not accept a job personally if I don't think, let's just say, the culture of the company is not the culture I want to be part of. So that's really the one thing that you learn, over your years of experience. And sometimes when the phone rings and I answer and I learn whatever and I start asking around to understand more about the culture of the company, I have in the past said no to offers, very 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 generous offers, because I want to work with quality people and a culture that's really incredible. Correct. That's the main thing for me.
When I think about students maybe interviewing for their first job, an easy way to implement what you talked about when you don't necessarily have a lot of experience to know how to compare cultures and so forth would be, if you don't really feel like you're clicking with the people you're interviewing with, that should be a red flag, right? Because just like with a marriage or a friendship, you're going to spend lots and lots and lots of hours with these people. And when you're interviewing, you ought to feel like, hey, I really like these people. I could hang out with these people. I feel like I'm thinking on the same wavelength. And if you leave an interview saying, yeah, they're really smart and this is a great company to have on my resume, yeah, the people are okay, that's probably going to be, a bad job for that person after a year or two.
Agree.
So, speaking of students, then, obviously that's what we do here at KSU. We educate students, get them ready for the workplace. If you had sort of one key piece of advice that you would give students as they come out, whether it's with a bachelor's, a master's, or a PhD, and they're going to be coming to talk to you or someone on your team about a job, what's the advice you have in terms of how they can best position themselves to get hired?
Uh, I mean, uh, the one thing in my mind when I'm looking at students, what is it that I'm looking for? Correct. I look at the skill set. Does your skill set match the job that's posted out there? I mean, not every job, requires per people to be expert in machine learning, correct? I need people that just say that are experts in natural language processing because I have lots of projects in that, correct? I may need people that are really very good in statistics because I have a lot of projects in that. So I guess what I'm simply saying for the student, match your skill set with the job, correct? And really the if you want to call it the job requirements, dig deep into what type of skill set are being asked. So during actually my interview, I always ask the candidate, what is really your best area of analytics and data science that you think you're really good at, and which areas you really don't think. And the reason I do that is just to try to in some sense split, correct, what is it that you're really passionate about and you really can say, hey, I can do this day in and day out, versus the thing I'm not really interested in. So I think if the student asks themselves that question, correct, they should say, oh, you know what, maybe I should focus on these set of companies rather than being all over, correct, trying to find match where maybe perhaps really I'm not a good match. But that's always in my interview. Tell me the things that you're really passionate about in data science, the real type of things that you want to do, pretty much. And then it's interesting. It always clears up very quickly what you really people are interested in doing versus not doing.
So speaking of interest, then let's dig into one of yours. You've done a lot of types of analytics, applied a lot of different methods to a lot of different
Yeah.
data. If you had to pick
Yeah.
one combination of method and data that is most dear to your heart, that you say, this is my favorite thing. If I could do this all day, I'm happy. What would that be?
Now you're interviewing me. Very good, Bill.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me tell you the one that I'm really, really passionate. I'm very passionate about stochastic system, correct? So stochastic system is about, modeling processes. Obviously, every process, every model is not accurate, so you have this noise component, correct? And you model something, and you think obviously it has noise, and how you filter that noise, correct? How you filter that noise out, how you really estimate with uncertainties, correct? Obviously, you always estimate an uncertainty, but really understanding, correct, randomness, correct, and a stochasticity of things, and really modeling these things, and really creating algorithm that can deal with the noise and really generate exceptional estimation that can drive optimization and other things is really something that I really like very much. Yeah, and I've done it for many years. But I've done obviously many other things. I've
Right.
done, I combined that with machine learning. I've done this and whatever other things. But yeah, but that was probably still the one after 20 years I'll go back to. It is certainly my passion.
Excellent. Well, if you think about over time that you've been in this field, what do you think something that's changed the most? If you look back at both what was happening and how analysts would have spent their time in your first job and what's going on today, what's something you think has been most changed?
I mean, the thing that you always see, correct, is when you're developing these solutions and you're implementing them in systems, correct, in decision support system, analysts, because you mentioned the word analysts, I can think of analysts when I was, in the airline industry. Oh my God, they were doing even much more, correct? Because the system have done a lot of the grunt work, but they're doing really the exciting things. The point is, it's really increased the capabilities of what an analyst can do, versus things they could never even imagine in the past. So in some sense, it's this ability to crunch all this data, present it, provide the insight, correct? Even the optimization, even the decisioning, the recommendation, at least of decisioning, and let basically the analyst, the person being out there to say, yes, I'm good with that, or the model for whatever reason, and there are instances, doesn't know of something that is not really modeled. Example, something happening in the market, correct? Or some disruption or whatever. So this is where the analyst comes in. They should really typically come in to make, in some sense, those changes for those situations where the system, the algorithm doesn't have knowledge of what perhaps is happening out there. But besides that, it really automates all of that and let them focus on those special cases. This is really when Bill, that actually, your algorithm are doing well. So an example, let me give you. In the airline industry, let's just say, you had a disruption because of weather, correct? And you had estimated some stuff regarding demand and whatever. You probably want to change all of those, correct? But then
Right.
not necessarily the system has information about that. So this is when the analyst comes in and they made adjustment because of something that the system didn't know, as an example. So that's what I'm referring to.
Okay. Well, before we run out of time, let's finish with a question of looking forward. We spent a lot of time talking about looking backward. What's a trend that you see coming on strong that's going to change the fields of analytics and data science in the 2, 3, 5 year time frame?
I mean, I know people throw AI here and there, but I want to maybe take a different approach and really be a little bit more specific, correct? So we had in the past, what do you call it? The descriptive, then come the predictive, and the prescriptive, correct? Okay, so we did all of that. Where are we really going in my mind? In my mind, there is this whole, in some sense, creating capabilities a la human, correct? Which some people call AI. If you're mimicking a human, that's different, correct? That's not really becoming, capable or doing things that humans do. But really, the thing that's probably going to be a little longer, it's not even in my mind, 3 or 5 years, is cognitive analytics. I call it cognitive. And in my way of describing things, I said we had descriptive, we had predictive, we have prescriptive, we're moving to cognitive analytics. So cognitive is the one that's next in my mind.
Great. Well, I want to thank you. I think you've provided some great insights for people today, and it's always a pleasure talking with you. And I know you travel back and forth between Atlanta and Texas on a regular basis. So people can catch you in either of those locations.
See you sometime soon in Atlanta in person.
Yeah, I look forward to it. And thanks so much, and thanks for joining me on the show.
Thank you, Bill.